So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Happy to have you here with us for the first webinar of the webinar series, Innovative Capacity Development Solutions to Promote Social Justice, the Role of Foundational Technologies. Today, we are going to concentrate on neurotechnologies and the future of learning and capacity building. My name is Stefano Merante, and I'm connecting with you from the Innovation Lab of the International Training Center of the ITCILO in Turin, Italy. I welcome you, all of you, to this webinar. In the next upcoming 90 minutes, we are going to discuss this very interesting topic. And I would like to give some housekeeping rules today. So the webinar is in English, but you will now have in the chat box the opportunity to engage with this webinar in more than 50 languages through an AI-assisted interpretation tool, which is called Wordly. So please follow the instructions that will be sent in the chat box if you want to listen to this webinar in different languages. So I'm really keen to have all of you on board. We will also have exciting speakers with us today. But first of all, I would like to invite with me on stage Mr. Andreas Klemmer, the Director of Training of the ITCILO, to kickstart this webinar. Andreas, happy to meet you here. A couple of questions to set the tone for this conversation today. Why has ITCILO gotten involved into research on the impact of emerging technologies on the future of learning and capacity development?
Well, thanks, Stefano, for the question. Two arguments here. Number one, we have a mandate to explore the nexus between technology and social justice. And also, we have to get better in doing this. So these are the two reasons. Let me elaborate a little bit further. We have a mandate to explore technology in order to harness it for accelerated positive change in our pursuit of social justice through decent work. And I would claim the center has done a fair job in the past doing this. Just a few examples. About 20 years ago, we launched our online learning campus. And in the meantime, we have more than 100,000 learners reaching us online. About 10 years ago, in 2013, we launched video conferencing, Zoom, and we had 10 calls per year, not per day, per year. That's just 10 years ago. Huh? Then in 2019, we got real on extended reality, launching our virtual campus. Maybe you still remember these Oculus One, these clunky headsets. That was just 5 years ago, 5 years. And since 2021, we are getting involved in artificial intelligence and have tried to incorporate this into our services. So the center has been at the forefront of harnessing technology for positive change. But my second argument, we have to get better at it. Because as director training, I'm constantly confronted with this fact that these technological breakthroughs, these bursts, get quicker and quicker, or they arrive at a much faster pace than in the past. I mean, remember, 10 years ago, video conferencing, 6 years ago, extended realities, 3 years ago, artificial intelligence. So the cycles get shorter and shorter. And as a director training, I have this dilemma how we can get ahead of the learning curve, not only reacting to these breakthroughs, but anticipating them by taking a more systemic approach and by looking at technology in its conjunction and not at individual technologies only. And this is why we have this webinar series.
Well, I was still thinking about the 10 Zoom calls per year. I mean, that would have been probably a better word. But I mean, we have to get on board with new stuff, of course, coming up. And we are talking now, I mean, not only about foundational technologies in general, this will be the topic of this webinar series, but today we focus on neurotechnologies in particular. Why? What explains this research angle?
Yep. You could ask, why have we waited so long to look at neurotechnology? Because neurotechnology, and you will hear it from our resource persons, is maybe not even an emerging technology. It's actually an old technology. It has been around for a long time. And what you see in recent years is accelerated progress in this technology. It has experienced some very fast change, which has gone largely unnoticed because of that hype cycle around artificial intelligence. So this webinar series also serves the purpose of bringing these other technologies to the forefront and to overcome this blind spot here in the benefit of progress.
Well, any spoiler about some initial findings of the research that the ITCILO is conducting?
Yeah, as you mentioned at the beginning, this is a webinar series, so it's more than one technology that we are going to cover over the coming months. We have a concurrent research on quantum right now, for instance, on quantum technologies. So I have that added advantage of seeing the results flowing in from our research on neurotech and also seeing the results of our research on quantum. And one takeaway for me, and that's a bit spoiler alarm, is this compounding impact of these technologies. So rather than getting fixated on one technology, whether neurotech or AI, it might be important to look at these compounding impacts of these technologies, how AI is propelling progress in the field of neurotech, and how quantum technologies propel progress in the field of AI. I mean, these interactions are very important. And maybe I would conclude by saying it might be even more important to look at the connectors than at the actors only. And I have that small anecdote. Last week, there was news about the release of this quantum chip called Willow by Google. This was in the midst of the preparations for this webinar here. And I picked up the phone and asked for a call with our team that works on quantum right now. And I said, guys, what's going on? Is this now one of these breakthrough points? Do we have to revisit our webinar on neurotech? And I was assured by the team, and I think they're in the call today, that this is not the breakthrough point. So Willow is not the moment, the OpenAI, ChatGPT moment. They assured me that we don't have to redesign this whole webinar right now. So I leaned back and I relaxed, and then I just stood straight again, because I heard this before, 4 years ago, when I was asking AI experts, are we close to the breakthrough point on AI? And the answer was, no, not yet. And the rest is history with OpenAI. So I think we have no reason to relax. And that's why we have today 3 great resource persons that will give us insights about where we stand in the progress when it comes to neurotech, what proof of concept products are there, but also a voice of caution from one resource person to make sure that we are not sleepwalking into imminent change.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And also to getting straight a little bit what we want to do. We are neither techno-enthusiast nor techno-skepticist. I would rather say we are techno-realists. So we want to know actually what is happening and how this is going to impact the future of learning and capacity development, which is our mandate here at ITCILO. To do so, today, we have the privilege and the honor to have with us 3 different resource persons who are going to help us shed some light on what the neurotechnologies are, how they are affecting the future of learning and capacity development. So we will have with us Murielle Fabre. We will have with us Adam Molnar, and we will have with us Milena Costas. So each of them will give us a different insight on what neurotechnologies are doing, what they are, and how they could affect the future of learning and capacity development. I will start by giving the floor to Murielle Fabre. After an international academic career in NLP and cognitive neuroscience, teaching in France at Cornell, New York, Murielle Fabre is currently advising on AI impact on human rights, data privacy, and the judiciary at the Council of Europe, and on generative AI responsible development and evaluation across UN agencies. As a consultant in the private and public sector, she advises C-level decision makers on generative AI corporate strategy and deployment, and the National Innovation Investment Fund France 2023 on generative AI ecosystem building. She actively disseminates technical understanding of large language models, AI regulation, and neurotechnologies in the media and beyond. Murielle, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me today. And one of the parts, important aspect I'll be talking about today is the hard task of scene setting the discussion and especially of understanding something about the brain. So I'd like you to follow me in order to have a first initial grasp of what it is that we are looking at, and especially what it is that the brain is actually giving us as an incredible complex system to be first understood. So the idea is that you have 85 billion neurons. Each neuron has the possibility of having around 10,000 connections, and everything in a very efficient and systematic manner. That is like using, according to different statistics, 20 watts. So it's really important to grasp this fact that you are in front of a very complex system, because the majority of the work that has to be done in order to interface with the brain is first understanding. So if neurotechnology is a technology that can collect, interpret, interfere, learn, and modify signal of the brain and nervous system, the first step that has to be done is to map its cognitive function in order to be able to interface it. So what is really important is that the main enabler of what has been happening in the last 10 years of neurotechnology is that we have been able to gradually have a more fine-grained mapping of cognitive functions. This is really important because neurotechnology is developing in parallel, trying to respond to the fact that 1 in 3 persons will develop neurological disorders at some point in their life. And this is the leading cause of disability on the global health ecosystem, and it's the second leading cause of death. So being able to understand what is the driver of neurotechnology in development and the innovation landscape is, firstly, before we talk about learning and education, is to understand that what is happening is that we are developing responses in order to address fundamental issues that are heavily increasing the health burden across the world. The Scientific American was titling the $10 trillion disease for Alzheimer and dementia. And in the meantime, we have a Europe expenditure of global healthcare that is around 10 billion just when we consider neurological disorders. So it means that neurological disorders in Europe is heart disease, diabetes, and cancer altogether as a size. It's really very important to understand that therapeutics are the one that are leading the whole innovation spectrum. And you can see it actually in the patent growth in the last 20 years. You can see that in 2018, something happened with the number of patents that were globally registered. And you can see it actually also in the amount of investment that is actually varying across different evaluations, but it's actually steadily augmenting in the last year around 10 to 14% per year. And we can put this in actually parallel with the expansion in the size of the global e-learning market. So this is actually something that is showing that there is a space, not only in investment, but for making neurotechnology happen also and have benefits in the educational and workspace ecosystem and market. I'd like to focus, now that we have a little bit of a scene setting of this framework of neurotechnology and industry, by putting forward some of the benefits and concerns, and especially because these concerns are really linked to use cases that are more out of the health spectrum and the healthcare market, because they involve mental privacy, identity, autonomy, the use of brain data and its consent, the licenses in order to train the algorithm that are decoding the brain, and all the AI risk that is now globally starting to be defined at the policy level, intersecting with neurotechnology. All this, of course, has to be said that has to be put in perspective with social justice and equitable access to these technologies. And I'd like to to put forward here that you are in a situation where neurotechnology is not like a monolithic aspect, like Andreas stressed. It's an agglomeration of enabling technology and innovation cluster that are converging. And one strong argument I'm going to make with two examples of last year deep brain stimulation breakthroughs is that AI and machine learning is one of the main drivers of this innovation. I'm saying this because when you put together material science, neurodata collection, transfer, storage, connectivity, analytics, and automation, you start to understand that the only way in order to orchestrate all this is a way of being very efficient in data processing. What you can see actually here is just keywords in the patent across 20 years. And you can see that one of the main bulk of this across different patents is computer technology. So how does this work actually? Neurotechnology can be divided into invasive and non-invasive. And we have recording technologies, stimulating technology, perception technologies. And irrespective of the fact that you are in a non-invasive situation, so that you record at the level of the scalp brain activity, you're always faced to some crucial enablers. One is brain mapping in order to know where to target intervention. This is an X-ray of one of the first patients that had this brain stimulation in order to alleviate tremors in Parkinson's disease. And on the opposite side, one of the crucial enablers of more, let's say, wearable settings that you have here in the pictures with electroencephalography recording at the level of the scalp is that you have to decode brain patterns. And these two settings, irrespective of whether you are inside the brain in the recording technologies or outside the brain, you are still going to be facing that what you get is this signal. So if you have brain penetrating microelectrodes, you get this signal. If you have ECOG, that is electrodes that are at the level of the surface of the brain, inside the brain, you get this signal. And if you are at the surface of the scalp, you get this signal. And you can imagine that in order to make it live, in order to make it real, and in order to make it very concrete in real life, you definitely have to have a lot of capacity of decoding this signal, this continuous signal, and to have pertinent feedback if you want to give feedback to the person. And so this is one of the fundamental aspects of deep learning, is that it enables you to have this kind of data that are recorded from the brain of a young man that had an accident with a spinal cord injury and that couldn't walk. And through this data, you can decode different aspects of what is walking. And that's definitely what happened last year in Switzerland. You have this probability of having a left move or a right move over here. And you have the stimulation amplitude that you take from the decoding in order to create a digital bridge to move the legs of the person. And so here is the recording while the person is doing these movements over here. And these are the cortical implants on the left and on the right of the motor cortex. And what is happening actually here is not that everything is magically decoded in the brain, but there is a series of approximation and of deep learning calculations that are happening in order to go to a very fine-grained output that is actually also measuring and predicting amplitudes of different muscles of the hip here, of the knee here, of the ankle. And it's continuous brain pattern decoding that is making this happen through this digital bridge that is transferring what is decoded to the part of the spine that is below the injury in order to make communication to the muscles happen. This is happening with walking, but last year was a major year in this field because it's happening also with speech recognition. And what is really important about this is that we are not decoding what people think they want to say, but what we are decoding is what the person is imagining pronouncing. And so in the end, this capacity of reconstructing speech is laying its feet on the fact that you have an algorithm that is decoding through the different electrodes that are implanted here in the brain, different aspects of what it is to pronounce a phoneme. And typically, aperture of your mouth, the position of the tongue, the position of the back part of the tongue. And so it means that what you need to learn is actually only 39 phonemes on English, and to decipher them across the activation patterns that you're recording inside the brain of the person that lost her ability to speak. And even more, you go even further in order to be able to decode what the person thinks internally and articulates internally her head. You have an additional layer of decoding that is taking with neural network the probability of each phoneme in English, one after the other in a word, and is actually reducing the possibility of the next phoneme according to the rules of English language. So in the end, when you are in front of this brain-computer interface, you are in front of a huge decoding machine that is transforming the phone, that is taking into account the phone probabilities from the signal in the brain, the sound speech feature and the articulatory gesture together, all brought together in real time. And this is something that is really important because it's a major enabler of making it happen, even in more complex situations like decoding bilingual, Spanish and English. So what I want to say here is that AI is a multifaceted enabler for online brain decoding. And what happens in wearables that are mainly based on electrophysiology recorded at the level of the scalp is that you have AI helping you with extracting feature from the raw signal over here. And then you have pattern recognition that helps you separate these different bandwidths that are an indicator of different cognitive aspects happening in the subject. So AI is helping you decode, but AI is also helping you having less sensor, which is fundamental in order to go to the wearable space. So we used to have in research more than 100 electrodes at the level of the scalp that were needing saline, that were needing water, gel in order to be fixed, and huge advancement made it happen that we could reduce the number of electrodes and still capture what was going on in brain waves of people participating to experiment. And now with wearables, what is happening is that we are going to the level that sometimes you can actually decode part of the internal state and brain waves of somebody through simple AirPods. This was the level of research, and then this was the level of the consumer product. So reducing the number of channels is important, but also enhancing the ergonomy of these devices has been possible in the miniaturization of electrodes and in the possibility of having wireless electronics and having also dry electrodes that could actually enter in a hairband. And in order to be able also to have wireless electronics in order to communicate what is being recorded at the level of the scalp. Something that is really important is that in wearables, especially because you're reducing the number of channel, data needs are really crucial. And sometimes people talk in AI of data as an infrastructure, but definitely there is a lot of effort that is being made also at the product level in wearable, in neurotech wearables, that is to acquire sufficient representative data in order to be able to reflect real world situation. So this is really important in this kind of pipeline and ecosystem of the data that is involved in wearables. And so wearables are really something that is that is really changing totally medicine. Recently, there was a Nature Medicine perspective article that showed to what extent wearables are making research protocols arrive in reality. And basically, when you see everything that is inside the water in the iceberg, is about quantity of data that can be leveraged through deep learning. And so this is making actually not only medicine more efficient and bringing real data into cohort studies, into case studies, into very controlled lab settings. And it's actually fostering the future of medicine and research. And this is also very important for education, because education doesn't happen in a lab. It doesn't happen, and especially adult education sometimes doesn't happen in a classroom. So it's fundamental that we can understand that what is being recorded with wearables is really the way to transfer research to society. And it's also fundamental to understand that what is a mental state can actually be inferred not only on neurodata. It's really important to see to what extent something you are all familiar with, that is a smartphone, is already a hub for a lot of non-neural data that can actually help picture and track mental states. So basic elements that can help you build a whole picture of the individual are fundamentally very simple sensors like GPS, like gyroscope in order to know what's the orientation of your telephone. Social rhythm can be detected through GPS. Wi-Fi can help identify if people go to the gym or to the bar, and proximity sensors are also a hint that can have that can give ideas about measuring social relationships. What is really interesting is that the camera and eye movement are a source of understanding of the emotional state. The face expression, the eye movements are a proxy in order to check, for example, medication effects or pupillometry. The touch screen is also a way in order to understand some elements of cognition like drowsiness. And of course, light sensor is a proxy in order to understand the sleep, which is highly correlated also with the success of education. Heart sensors is helping track nervous system, anxiety, arousal, and voice, of course, is a source of detection of emotion, but also of social environment. If one thinks that all this information can actually, all this behavioral information can actually go to multimodal and be added to multimodal neurophysiological data, it's starting to give a very full picture of the person. So neural data are not isolated as long as you have a smartphone. And this is actually something that startups are actually leveraging through generative AI in order to have a multimodal picture of the individual. When it comes to education, and this will be the last section, it's really important and crucial also to target intervention and to target capacity building, to understand what lies behind what are called neuromarkers, and especially neuromarkers like individual level ones, the blue ones here, like cognitive load, focus, memory, indirect markers that influence education like stress and sleep, and group level markers. Sorry. What is really fundamentally changing in e-learning is that people are no more in the shared space. So being able to track group level markers is a very important proxy in order to understand how you create collaborative dynamics, how you can understand the engagement, the arousal level, attention, interest of people that are being at distance. But for a teacher, it's really fundamental to understand what it is based on. And I really like to call your attention on these elements of scientific grounding of what is considered to be a neuromarker. And here I'm going to focus on how you can track engagement through the synchrony of the temporal recording of brain waves. And so these are different students. And while you calculate the synchrony of what is being heard and what is the brain waves of an individual, you can definitely find that this group has a high synchrony, while this group has a low synchrony. And this is an hypothesis that has been repeatedly coming in the research literature. And it's really important to see that having this possibility to experiment is the only way in order to be sure that these neuromarkers are really meaningful for education. So this is the setting with students wearing their EEG headsets. These are the brainwaves that are being recorded. And then this is the brainwave similarity calculation. And interestingly, this calculation can happen at the level of the group. Targeting
1 minute to go.
Yeah. And at the level of 2 by 2 students. This is another 10 years after the paper that is showing the same idea of having better listener following the speaker. Showing the better the listen follow the speaker, the closer the listen cluster together. And so here is the way it's calculated. If the listener are more similar, they cluster together with the speaker, and this can be shown in time. So here I'm going to ask a bunch of questions at the individual level, because when you are a learner and you have your mental states being tracked in this case, stress, engagement, interest, focus, excitement, relaxation, what is actually happening? What is actually the relationship one has with its own scoring? What is normal, not normal? What is the idea of mental privacy in this configuration? And what will the teacher say about my neuroanalytics? And especially when this is conveyed with fancy ways of thumbs up, when you have time constraints, when you're winning points, it's important to understand this in order to be able to craft significant pedagogical innovation in the space of neurotechnology. And so one last point in order to conclude is to understand that neurotechnology is actually making the teacher space be an overcrowded space, because the teacher has not only the feedback on quizzes, task assignments, but now the teacher will have also a lot of information about the student states, be it in the classroom or be it in the remote classroom. And it's really important in order to develop capacity building to target this very important space of the teacher that is a new space that is actually mainly interfacing with AI and recommendation engines that target and analyze the data of neurotechnology wearables. And actually, this space is really fundamental because it happens to be the human in the loop in this new classroom configuration. And so this is how I would like to conclude. And thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much, Murielle. Very interesting presentation. Thanks for having shown what the compounding impact that we were discussing actually looks like, to have highlighted this very important inclusion component in terms of opportunities that we have for learning, but also the effects on individuals' capacities to learn, to communicate, and with this very important focus on education. I'm really excited as a trainer for the opportunities that open up, but also thanks to your presentation, conscious of the challenges that are still out there in order to have a really human-centered approach to the use of these technologies for training and capacity development. Let's dive even deeper with our second speaker, Adam Molnar, into this discussion. Adam is Neurable's co-founder and VP of Strategic Partnerships, recipient of Forbes 30 Under 30 for Consumer Technology, and a leader in neurotech, data privacy, and deep tech licensing. For over a decade, he has negotiated complex multi-million-dollar contracts and agreements with global brands and corporations, including major technology companies, the US Department of Defense, Red Bull, and more. He is also an advisor to the Institute of Neuroethics, steering member to Harvard's DCI network, and founder of the Neurotechnologies Content Laboratory. Adam, floor is yours.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. First of all, I just want to shout out, first of all, I want to share my presentation. And then I want to shout out everyone who's joining around the world, whether it's extremely early or super late, or maybe you hit the sweet spot right in the middle of the day. Thank you for joining us. This is extremely important. And as Stefano mentioned, I'm a co-founder of a company called Neurable that's trying to operationalize a lot of the principles that Murielle just detailed out in her latest presentation. And I look forward to sharing these concepts with you and building this future together. I really like this idea initially shared in the kickoff of compounding impact. And I think this is how we achieve that. So, I'm gonna just do one quick unshare share. So before I dive in, I want to give you all a visual look of what the future could look like. So play this short video.
What if the future we want, the technology that will remake our world, is already inside of each of us? What if the future is our brain, unlocked? We see a future where patients with chronic illnesses find new independence, where we can monitor brain health data in real time and share it with the doctor, transforming data into customized treatments in the process. We're building a future where our brain can tell us when it's tired, so we'll always know when we need to take a break, to boost productivity and happiness. We see a future where music listens to us, to the way we're feeling at a neurological level, with custom playlists curated for our current mood. We're building a future where we even communicate differently, by thinking, not typing, turning thoughts into inputs, where we can tell our loved ones we're safe, just by thinking it. At Neurable, we're harnessing the power of the human brain to build the future we see. Not smaller screens and thinner bezels, not more technology, more human technology. We believe the future is a place where technology works for us while receding into the background. At Neurable, we're not waiting for the future. We're building it into the devices we use every day. Neurable, the mind.
So I wanted to share that video because that video can visualize some of the concepts that I'll never be able to communicate as clearly. But before we dive in, just to cover our basis, some terms. neurotechnology, brain-computer interfaces, brain-machine interfaces, neural interfaces, these are all similar expressions with a little bit of nuance, but they basically mean the systems that connect to our brains and vice versa. And then some other concepts are invasive versus non-invasive. Am I wearing it outside of my body or inside of my body? Are these systems understanding? Are they recording? Or are they stimulating? Are they doing something to me? Otherwise known as writing. Then there's this general concept of biopotential, which is just all electricity generated by biomechanical actions or biochemical actions. Blood markers are things that we would understand that can look at DNA, tell us if we're predisposed to something. Temporal versus spatial resolution is basically looking at what is the kind of information coming from these sensors. Is it from a time series? Are we looking at something very quickly or over a long period of time? Or spatial resolution, how much density do we have? Are we looking at a small part of the brain or the whole brain? And then lastly, medical versus consumer, which is a large deviation between the types of technology. So when we think about quote unquote neurotechnology, this is what people generally think about. These are various different types across functional, near infrared, or EEG, fMRI, and invasive, non-invasive. This is a visual depiction of what neurotechnology generally looks like in a laboratory or research environment. And when we think about a brain-computer interface, which is my expression of choice, what we're looking at is this feedback loop. We're looking at how the brain outputs data that's collected by a device, sent to a computer, processed by some kind of system, usually an AI, and then sent back to the brain via some kind of visual or auditory interface. And then I want to zero in on the technology electroencephalography. This is the technology that I am most closely aligned and work with, and this is what those kinds of technologies have looked like in the past. In my hands, I actually hold, we see, yeah, it's coming in and out. But this is a over $25,000 medical grade EEG system, dry. And it's used primarily for research and some kind of medical applications, but it's mostly restricted to medical or research environments. But this is what they look like now. The device that I'm wearing is actually a brain sensing enabled system. It's a pair of headphones that have dry electrodes built into the ear cup. It's meeting the user halfway. So when we think about what consumer systems can look like, we want to think along the spectrum of cost, comfort, performance, look, and convenience. Where if we think about where these systems were in the past, we'll never have widespread adoption until it meets that criteria of being affordable, being comfortable that it could wear on a near daily basis. Performance, meaning that it's doing something that's actually useful to an end user. Look, when I'm wearing this, I want to make sure that I don't look different from my peers around me. I don't want to call social scrutiny because I'm putting something on myself that is different than the quote unquote normal. And then lastly, convenience. I think it's fundamental that these kind of technologies are embedded into the natural systems that we use on a daily basis. Think about the success of other wearables like watches and rings. These are sensors built into systems that we use on a pervasive basis. And when we think about these capabilities, we think about what it can do. This is truly the future, whether it's we're dealing with an aging population or mental health crises. This is putting the brain at the forefront that's allowing us to start to fundamentally change how we approach these problems. And when I talk about EEG, electroencephalography, the first things that I want to share is that there is an outstanding list of capabilities that are possible from this, or biopotentials writ large. These are all, this is not a non-exhaustive list of these use cases pulled from the literature, some of which my company has operationalized into a product. And this kind of technology development doesn't take an overnight development. It's a lot of these iterative small steps that build up over time that allow us to go from these really complicated medical grade systems step by step towards less invasive, more performant, more convenient less expensive products that we can now use on a daily basis. And how my company does that is we actually do leverage AI. Very similar to Murielle's presentation, we've been able to use that to reduce the sensor count from something that's usually 20 plus sensors all the way down to 16 channels. And when you can do that, you can see how these sensors can now live in the daily devices that we use on a daily basis, whether it's to improve our exercise, to help us with our study regimen. These can be used as a fundamental understanding. This is the product that I'm wearing. Sorry for the plug. But this is what that kind of interface can look like, where we're trying to make the brain more accessible through interfaces that people are generally comfortable with. So we have this dashboard that you can open up, and with it, you can see how your brain is expending, allocating cognitive resources. I think one of the most important capabilities that we've developed over this time is this idea of an algorithm that can tell when the brain is getting tired. The brain is a funny organ because unlike your muscles or your other organs in your body, there are no pain receptors. So you can't actually feel your brain. But when you make, in an effort to make the brain more accessible, we're allowing you to feel your brain. And when you can feel your brain, you now have this closed feedback loop for you to really initiate change. So, for example, this one of the capabilities of this product is the ability to see how people are using and expending their focus equity. And we can see that over time. And then what we can do with that is then we can customize and improve the interventions that allow you to really take the best use of that. And when we do something like this, we then see some stark findings. So someone who's neurotypical engage in a deep focus task, this is what they look like in one of our plots, versus someone with diagnosed ADHD engage in the same deep focus task. We see not that they are struggling necessarily, but that their brains are operating differently. And with that, we can then institute some key changes to really help people feel their best self. And I showed this product now that I imagine many are familiar with. It's the iPad. And the reason why I share it is because I think it has a very powerful connection to the kind of products that not just my company, but everyone in the neurotechnology space are trying to develop. The iPad, or if we think about the assistive augmentative communication space, so that's the class of technologies that help someone without arms communicate, someone that has considered locked-in syndrome, meaning they can use no motor functions. They don't have the ability to use their vocal cords. The iPad represented a generational leap for augmentative assistive communications devices. It's now the #1 used AAC device in the world. And the reason why I share that is because the iPad wasn't built necessarily to be that. But with this development, with this platform capability, it can now help so many people around the world leapfrog challenges around them. We see this similarly in the AI space, where access to ChatGPT across the world helps people with learning opportunities that they would never have been able to have before. And similarly, and I promise I don't work for Apple, I don't have any equities, but if we look at the Apple Watch, it's the most FDA approved device in the country. It is used for arterial heart AFib. It's worn by millions of Americans every day. And that is also partially because it launched not as a product that is built to see that your heart is operating in a healthy, normally functioning way, but it was built as this general platform and then was able to grow into this juggernaut of a health device. So when we think about BCI or neurotechnology and how they can have an implication with regards to training, I really like to think about remote work, where we are relatively isolated, but what we can do to benefit from that is we can put data into the system. We could improve remote learning by curating learning protocols unique to each individual person. Each individual has unique learning capabilities and learning styles, and we can actually use output. We can look at focused trends from that in order to inform how that goes. If we think about it more from a manufacturing capacity, there is a brainwave called error-related negativity. There's actually a neural response for when the brain sees a mistake and recognizes it. You can use that in combination of other kinds of data points to actually help someone before they make a mistake that at best costs a lot of money, or at worst can take someone's life. And then if we think about the neurodiverse community and with regards to training, there's a huge challenge in sensory overload. And we're seeing that leveraging a device that's very clued into the sensory processes, we can then better manage that, help people with these sensory challenges better communicate, better engage in an educational process. And then lastly, burnout. It's a pervasive issue across knowledge workers around the world. Being able to be clued into how your brain is spending these resources, how a muscle, for example, is getting sore, the equivalent of that for the brain. We did a study with the Mayo Clinic in the United States, a famous hospital institution, where we were able to run a study looking at people taking breaks according to the gold standard literature. It's about 48 to 52 minutes per deep work task. And we were able to see how they could improve their performance by having an algorithmically recommended break, meaning the same intervention, the same amount of time off, but we were able to see by changing the timing of that, we were able to boost performance of the individual and have a statistically significant stress reduction. But all of this positive application, it should be taken with a note on policy and ethics. That around the world, various groups and agencies are fighting to make sure that a lot of them.
Please.
Yes, sir. A lot of the mistakes that we made, like for example, in the internet, we can theoretically get ahead of in the neurotechnology space. So just quickly examining Chile's Neuro Rights Bill, they're the first country to enact this bill that I think has a lot of amazing positives and contributions, but I think generally they get some things wrong. A very fundamental point that I want to make is that we want to police applications, not technology. That when Murielle was talking about what we can do, we want to make sure that this is in support of our identity. We're protecting identity and all of these things. Just very quickly, if we look at the brain and the heart and your hands, against all of these, they're creating data. And this data can be mapped and made sense of, and they have various degrees of sensitivity. For example, brain data can yield insights to how people are focusing or attending, these general macro trends. But if I were to look at what your hands did on a keyboard, I can make sense of your search history and really put together your state of being. And with blood, I have full access to your DNA makeup, and I can determine who is at risk of diseases and not. So I generally share this to think about more holistically of how we can safeguard a future powered by neurotechnology. And that will go to not just technology policy, but more so data policy. How do we manage applications and not technology? How do we make sure that we're always respecting the end user and building with diverse perspectives? And then lastly, I think it's really important that we build against positive change as opposed to hype. Sometimes it can be really easy for us to get caught up in where something is going as opposed to how we can best manage something now. And then lastly, transparency. We need to make sure that at every stage of development, people understand what we're doing, how they're at, and what we can do to improve every step of the way. I have a few more points, but there's so many things going on that I want to make sure that we're respectful of time. And I'm more than happy to follow up with anyone on this call. So please, I'm just Adam at Neurable. Thank you all for having me, and I look forward to the next presentation.
Thank you very much, Adam, for your very insightful presentation. I think you have shown us how those wearables can be a tool for our everyday life, in particular also for people with, let's say, a neurodiverse, with neurodiversity. And I think your last point here about rights is something that is a perfect transition to our next speaker, because this idea of having a human-centered approach to this type of technology, to the application of this type of technology, and protecting the identity. I mean, there are also some questions, if you want to respond in the Q&A part already, that you may want to see about identity and about a human-centered approach. I think this calls for a human rights-based approach to this. And even if we heard that quantum is high on the UN agenda, and actually in 2025 will be announced as a year of quantum in the UN. Already in September 2024, at the 57th Commission of the Human Rights Council Advisory Committee, a paper, I mean, within the UN agencies, within the UN system already, a paper on impact, opportunities and challenges of neurotechnology with regard to the promotion and protection of all human rights was presented. And we have, I mean, we are happy to have with us one of the persons that is behind this report and the rapporteur of this report, that is Milena Costas, a United Nations human rights independent expert and a member of the UN Human Rights Council Advisory Committee. She has been the rapporteur of this study that I was mentioning, but also the member of the UN Human Rights Council Working Group on Communications and member of the panel of experts on freedom of assembly and association. She's also a senior consultant on human rights and humanitarian law. So Milena, to round out our discussion with this human rights-based approach to neurotechnologies, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you. You can unmute. Okay, great.
Okay. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Perfect. Your presentation is
okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you very much for organizing this meeting. And it's obviously a great honor to me to be invited. And it was very enlightening, all that I heard up to now. Now we are moving, as you mentioned, to another focus, to all what we are talking about neurotechnologies. And as you mentioned, we produced, I was the rapporteur of this report or study on the impact, opportunities and challenges of neurotechnologies on human rights. And this report, because I need to put all the audience in the context, who are we, why we produced this report. This report was produced within the UN system, and we are the advisory committee of the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council is the main body working and dealing and debating on human rights issues all across the board. So it's made up of all the states of the world, but we have 47 states who are taking decisions in each session. This body is not composed by permanent members, so it's quite dynamic, and they are changing in each, to say the mandates of these members are just for 2 years. So it's quite, the composition is not static, just to say that. This council in 2022 asked the advisory committee, which is a think tank body. It's made up of 18 members, and we are representative of all regions across the world. This advisory Human Rights Council asked us to develop a study. And why they asked us to develop this study? So this is the reason why I'm also the rapporteur, because we have the possibility of present topics to the human, or call the attention of the Human Rights Council on a specific groundbreaking issues, or issues that we think are especially complex and that should be examined or addressed from the human rights lens. And during the session of our advisory committee, I read this article where it was, the title was, "We need a new universal declaration on neurorights, on human neurorights." And I was really shocked about this title. And also I was like, really curious about what was the topic, or what they were saying about a new human rights universal declaration. So what I found out was that there was a lot of scholars, a great number of scholars who were working on neuroscience and also from the bioethics area, who were examining these neurotechnologies and particularly the impacts and the challenges that from the human rights perspective, the introduction of these technologies, not only in the medical field that we know that they have been for many years, but mostly the introduction of these technologies into the commercial and the market for wide use could have on the human rights enjoyment. So they were asking for a new framework, that framework of neural rights, which was supposed to better protect human mind and human thoughts and human rights. So from that, I decided that it was a really important subject to bring to the attention of the Council. And from there, we made a research proposal, and the Council endorsed this. How can I go back? Sorry. Voila. And the Council endorsed this proposal through the adoption of a resolution that was adopted by consensus. So it was a very good sign, because usually the Council is polarized, as you may imagine, because there are many issues that are too political oriented. But in this case, we received an endorsement of the whole Council, asking us for developing this study on the impacts, opportunities, and challenges. It's true that there are states that can sponsor this resolution, and we had more sponsorships from the WEOC, the European and Occidental countries, also Latin American states, but we had less interest into the African and ASEAN groups. But I think now, that was also one of the purposes of this report, was also to raise awareness on the importance of the topic. So I think now all groups are really keen on knowing how the findings of our report, and also to give a follow-up on the recommendations. You see here, there were like 4 countries who were leading the diplomatic negotiations on this resolution. That was Greece, Switzerland, Chile, and Singapore. And we had also the sponsorship of states very various, as you see, Israel, US, Germany, also Palestine, etc. So here is the report that was presented this past September to the Human Rights Council, and it was very well received, I need to say. You never know, but it was really well received. We presented in an interactive dialogue with the members of the Council on the 26th September. And we had a very good feedback, so that's why we are asking also for a follow-up. I will tell you more about that later on. So what we are seeing is that this report is having quite a big impact, not only because also Stefano contacted me because he saw this report, but also, I mean, we are pushing forward other initiatives in other international organizations, but also at the level of the UN in particular, such as in UNICEF, who are now with a project, Innocenti, I think it's called, where they are also diving into recommendations in order to protect, better protect or better guarantee the protection of children from the risks and impacts of neurotechnologies. But of course, we come also from one of the first reports I read was the report from the UNESCO on 2021, where they delved into the several ethical issues related to the development and implementation of neurotechnology. This is a must for any of you that want to follow up on this topic. I would advise really to read this report and also the report we are presenting, because the perspective is completely different from, I mean, the technical one is more based on impact on ethics, human rights, and society. So that would give you a very complete overview on the topic. So one of the main objectives of our report was also to highlight why human rights are important, why human rights should be very important, not the only one, but one of the most important approaches in the conversation. We really note that many of the conversations taking place also at the UN level, at the political level, to define the policies related to neurotechnologies, many often ignore the human rights approach and concerns. So we wanted to provide also, as a part of this conversation, I insist, this lens, and also make it understandable for people, because we are also interacting with companies and people working on neurotechnologies. And what we understand is that they really don't know how to operationalize this, as Adam also mentioned before. So the importance of this approach is because human rights help states to clarify its obligation in relation to neurotechnologies, and also to make it harmonize or be in line all policies they can undertake, which are aligned with human rights obligations and human rights treaties to which they are part. Human rights approaches can be embedded in policies, and also after that will be operationalized through the national legislation. So let's say that human rights is a first, many basic layer of normative oriented regulation, but this has then to be translated obviously through national legislation and also through specific regulations on the specific technology. We think also that the human rights approach is very important to be at the side of companies and other private actors, which has also to be in line with human rights approach also in their own policies. And we know also that there are these principles adopted also under the UN framework on human rights and companies and business. So for us, it's very important to implement, to help companies in implementing this framework. And also because through this human rights approach, we will be also helping other institutions at the national level, and also, for example, the democratic oversight. What we understand that it's a democratic oversight, so it's also to making people or allowing people to be informed about what are their rights, and also to identify in this context, which is really important and difficult, to identify what are the kind of violations, human rights violations that can arrive, and also, of course, abuses and misuses by companies in this context. So we are saying that through by addressing these challenges and these impacts that neurotechnologies may have on human rights, we are also helping to the technological innovation and development. So that is one also important point that we wanted to raise through this report. So we are also very focused on vulnerable groups, and we also know that the most at risk of being exploited also at the very early stages of experimentation of technologies might be also people which are marginalized, socially marginalized, and all other vulnerable people that we have found in our report are, for example, as children, as I mentioned, but also persons with disabilities, and also older people. So there.
Milena, two minutes to go.
Okay, my dear. So just to run a bit, what shall I say? I mean, in relation to the commercial applications, for example, we highlight, because we are in an international labor organization, what are the risks in the implementation of these technologies within the work setting. And for example, what we say as principle, then obviously there are exceptions, is that except in particularly rare cases, these technologies may introduce far-reaching concerns on worker fundamental rights, including decent work conditions. And for example, also we introduce other risk, for example, the risk of neurosurveillance and the necessity also to balance, to include the workers' rights in the balancing exercise also when introducing these technologies. And as Adam mentioned, these uses, what is the advantage that these uses are going to introduce, what are the impact at the same time, but also focusing very much on workers' work and also rights, and also the concept of decent work. Just to finish, I wanted to finish with this slide on policy. As Adam mentioned already, the reactions and the policies provided by different states are at the very beginning. They are incipient, but we have several different approaches. So we have law, like the reform of the Chilean constitution. We have guidelines, ethical guidelines in China related to business. We have more restrictive law on accountability also in France, Brazil protecting mental data, in Spain, other approaches. So we are saying that this is very fragmented approach that is not adequate to address the human rights impacts and risks being posed by these technologies. We highlight, for example, freedom of thought and privacy, of course. So what we are saying in our report, and this is the main recommendations, and I'm finishing, Stefano, is that we should have a minimum common understanding on what is about this human rights approach. And we are proposing that the Council, the Human Rights Council, adopt a set of principles to guide states and also companies on how to implement this human rights approach while dealing with the development and implementation of neurotechnologies. We think that this would be a first step. Obviously, this should afterwards be translated into national legislation, and maybe why not, if the need there is, in a treaty. But I think this is long-term approach. So for the time being, we are just being cautious, also knowing that these are technologies that are emerging and developing, and it's very difficult to grasp also these impacts. But we are highlighting the need of an urgent anticipation also of the impacts and risks being posed. So thank you very much. And
thank you very much, Milena, thank you very much, Milena, for having been with us. I'm fascinated by the Universal Declaration of Neural Rights concept. And also, I think it's interesting to see how there is a call for international standards for that, with national action that is obviously happening already in some countries. And these ideas of principles, I will go back to this after a minute. First of all, I would like to launch a poll. I would like to hear now for the more or less 120 people that are in our call that have followed the 3 presentations, to describe in one word what is your reaction to the presentations and the potential impact of neurotechnologies on the future of learning and capacity development. We want to hear from you. We already have some questions in the question and answers box. Please continue, put your question there, because we are going to take some questions right now in the Q&A session with the 3 speakers. Maybe I would like to start with Murielle. I mean, we have heard already about regulation and ethics, both from Adam and from Milena. So I would like maybe to hear your views on this point before we engage in the Q&A session with the questions in the box. But maybe, Murielle, your takes on this.
Thank you, Stefano, for starting with me. My understanding is, and that was also what I tried to convey in my presentation, is that there is a lot of space where neurotechnology and AI do interface. And I'm thinking in European terms because we just had a legislation on AI, a transversal one. And many aspects of what I put forward, for example, in the human in the loop situation and configurations, are actually aspects that are also found in AI feedback, for example. And this is also a very important topic because when I showed, and Adam put it forward again, the fact that you can have neurodata and a lot of other data and put together, I think the main question about regulating and having neural rights is understanding to what extent we are in a configuration where neurodata plus all the behavioral data that are already in reality are more predictive than the other data, and do allow a more fine-grained profiling, a more fine-grained emotion detection, and so this is my guess, that we have to understand at the policy level to what extent neurodata are predictive of human behavior, together with all the other data, because data can be all pulled together thanks to AI. And so at the European level, we see that many things like emotion detection in education and at the workplace are no more possible according to a fixed legal framework. So there is a lot of space of co-regulation. And I do really like this idea that was put forward by Milena and also Adam, that there is some space of helping companies think about human rights. Because when you are building products, you are not a human rights expert. You're thinking about the end user, that's for sure. But all the other aspects that are involved in what is a product, what is the life of a person, what is an educational path, are not really totally there for you, because there is still a lot of experimentation needed. And so from a policy point of view, I think that these ecosystem bridging initiatives are really important in order to create products that also respect human rights.
Thank you very much. And I think we can take away this idea that the compounding impact is not only the positive compounding impact, but we have to look at the compounding impact also at human rights level in the regulation, etc. And I think this is a very important takeaway. Maybe let us show a little bit what were the reactions of our crowd today. We are looking at the word cloud right now. This is being generated. So insightful at the heart of it. It's promising as well. Amazing. I see people that have mixed, let's say, feelings as well. I think there is a lot of interest on how this can become exciting for the future of learning and capacity development. A lot of words that intrigue, a lot of inputs that intrigue our participants. So thank you very much for participating in this short poll. Now let's go back to our questions, and maybe there are some that I would like to address to our speakers. One in particular caught my attention, that is on how can neurotech markets address fire incidents and accident-related matters also through AI support. So this goes back to one of the hearts of the ILO mandate, that is occupational safety and health, one also of the rights, of the fundamental principles and rights at work. So how can we potentially also use neurotechnologies in order to prevent potentially this type of accidents? I don't know who wants to take this one from all of you. Adam, please.
Yeah, and thank you so much again. So we can, if we were able to integrate sensors into hearing protection, head-worn protection, devices that people use on a daily basis. There are patterns, these like large abstract patterns that can be interpreted and boosted even further when you combine it with other things like motion from a gyroscope or accelerometer. We can see how people are trending towards making a decision and or at risk for making a mistake. We ran a study at my organization that other people have around the world replicated, that you can, to some extent, predict when someone's going to make a mistake in a controlled task. And this is an experimental situation, but you can see how when you have that kind of insight, you can supercharge an individual to not just perform their best self, but also to be their safest self. So that's one way to go about it.
Thank you very much. I think it's very useful to see also this type of potential applications to other parts of the ILO mandate, not just, the mandate related to capacity building and learning. And I think, prevention of accidents and, supporting occupational safety and health can really be a use case in the next future. Maybe a question now to Milena. There is a question that we get from Luc Victor. As this technology evolves and will become available for wider use, how can we be sure that this will be equitable and not limited only to a select few? That it will be made available for those that may need it, people with dyslexia, etc. But sadly, some may find it prohibitive or exclusive. Maybe just one point on inclusion from your side, Milena, before I get to Murielle with another question.
Yes, this is the big question, but not only related to neurotechnologies. It's the big question of our world, which is not equitable. And so it's a question of priorities, first of all, to see what are the needs of people at medical level, what are the main issues. But I think also, it's first of all, we have to make sure that we can have access to technologies which is reliable, which is useful, and human rights compliant. So after that, I think we have to strive for access for everyone. And there is a problem also of patents. So for that, I'm not very into the detail, but I know that that would be an issue also for access.
Access is important, and I think, there is a question maybe that it goes a little bit in this sense. We have spoken about many things, but what would be the underlying infrastructure that will be needed to implement neurotechnologies in education and training? Because we have been talking about software, we have been talking about wearables, but is there an infrastructure element that you want our participants to be maybe more cognizant of?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that it's really important to understand that infrastructure is not only cloud computing, it can be local servers. And for an experimentation setting, I think local servers are really the way to go, because you may want, for the sake of research, not to anonymize data in order to be able to increase the relationship with the people participating to the experimentation. So it's really important to understand that infrastructure is, especially for wearables, where you need to diminish the number of channels that you are recording. Data is an infrastructure. So it's really fundamental to see to what extent you need real data, noisy data, people scratching their heads, people just not switching on the wearable, and these kind of settings in order to be able to really understand what you have as a capacity building. I would say that data and local servers are the way to go.
Thank you. I saw Adam wanted to contribute a little bit. Go ahead.
Yes, those are all very important. And when we think about practically incorporating these in classrooms or any kind of educational context beyond an experiment, you need to meet the end user where they are and the end system where it's at. It's unrealistic to expect classrooms or universities to change their whole IT or infrastructure to accommodate a new technology. And instead, what I think, products should be built to fit within the paradigms primarily with some exceptions, so that classrooms can best benefit? How can this fit into a reporting structure that teachers are already using? Because at every step in the way, we don't want to ask individuals or organizations to adopt new behaviors. That's how you create friction to change. We want to remove those barriers so that they can be more easily adopted. And with that, then come important things like, how do you make sure that something is validated? What is a ground truth? How do you abstract away from a black box, which is usually how AI is often in development, at least in the private sector? These are some of the big problems that we'll want to figure out if we want to incorporate.
This is very interesting. Milena, you're raising your hand. I mean, you can guess, I can give you the floor.
Yes, no, just to add something, because I'm like in the other side, like looking at the risks all the time. So
Yeah,
just to highlight from the
human on board here, so that we can
just
let's say a meaningful discussion.
Just to complete, from the human rights perspective, what we have to look at is the risks of data protection for privacy, obviously, and also the risks of discrimination. So to have the adequate framework to ensure that all these risks are addressed correctly. And so just wanted to add that in order also to facilitate access equitable to everyone.
Sure, this is important. I think the end user argument is very important, how we can actually create and implement experiments, but then also scale up then technologies for, let's say, classrooms, etc. I like very much the herding example that Murielle was saying, and I think this is fit for purpose, and this is something that, of course, I think as ITCILO, we are very much interested in knowing more and understanding more in our research, as Andreas was saying at the beginning. Last question. I think, Murielle, you may want to take it. Can you talk more about the application in deep learning, especially neural networks and natural language processing under the umbrella of AI?
So if I understand the question, maybe I would have to have a little bit more details. But what I understand from the question is that you want to know to what extent a simulation of the brain is something that is involved in the process of decoding. And from this point of view, I would say that it's, I would take an example. Is it somebody that said, no, okay, so I thought the question was specified in chat, sorry. I would take one example. There have been the Olympics, and after the Olympics, there were the Paralympics, and there has been some startups that have been presenting new ways of using generative AI and the capacity, actually the pattern finding machine that neural networks are, in order to be able to contextualize much more the way that an artificial arm is activated through a brain-computer interface. And so one of the interesting potentials of all this, given that we give enough protection to all the data of the person and that they are not profiled, not manipulated, and there is cybersecurity, and given all this, is that you are able actually to integrate contextual environmental data that help you increase the BCI effectiveness. And so this is really important, because when you think to what extent the brain is an interface with reality, a continuous interface with reality, where decisions are made on hundreds and thousands of little signals that are being processed, you need to have contextual elements in order to effectively simulate what the brain is doing. And so this is, I think, one of the main potential of integrating neural networks, not only with the example I showed, that they reduce the possibility of all possible English phonemes when a person is subarticulating, is internally speaking, because the person lost the capacity to work. So not only in order to reduce the computation, but also to integrate new data in order to make people with disability more efficiently interfacing with arms, artificial arms, for example, like it was presented during the Paralympics.
Thank you very much once again for addressing this question also from the inclusion angle, which is very important and I mean cut across our whole webinar. I think we have come to an end. I have to say I'm very sad about it because I could have talked with you still a couple of hours, but I know you have stuff to do, and I think everybody also on the call. I will ask Mr. Andreas Klemmer, Director of Training of ITCILO, to give us some concluding remarks about this exciting session that we have had this afternoon.
And don't worry, it's not going to be a presentation after the presentation now. I'm also not a neuroscientist. I'm a battle-hardened director training. You know, I have to make sense of this now. So what does this mean for a learning service provider like the center? A few thoughts from a layman, but a layman who has to make investment decisions. So I understand for Murielle better what neurotechnology is now as far as a director training is concerned. It's about mapping cognitive functions to combat neurological disorders, but also to enhance cognitive performance, in brackets learning. And maybe the enhancement of cognitive performance, it hasn't even been the main issue. The main driver is probably combating neurological disorder. But there is this interesting, this interesting line of thought about enhancing cognitive performance. It's a growing market, evidently. You made a distinction between invasive and non-invasive technologies, and for understandable reasons, we are mostly interested in non-invasive technologies. Bear with us. To map neural signals, decode brain patterns. And here you focused on wearables. I mean, wearables is probably for the purposes of learning and the world of our work is probably the lower hanging fruit. Wearables to focus on. Wearables to track locations, monitor physical location, measure social relations, assist changes or assess rather changes in nervous systems, including emotional states. You made a distinction between individual level neuromarkers and group level neuromarkers. And I think for the purpose of learning, Murielle, that was very interesting. I took careful note. And you concluded by highlighting this consumer devices that could be used to bring neuroanalytics to the classroom in a more playful manner and in a human-centered approach. And this is where Adam came into the picture. As I said, I'm simplifying it a little bit. Forgive me. I'm just highlighting a few gold nuggets where Adam came in and he was presenting the state of play of wearables. Not to repeat also things that Adam said earlier, but just the main message for me is the future is now. When we talk about wearables, this is not a thing which will be there in 10 years. This is first horizon. You know, for learning managers, wearables are reality. They look a bit like Dr. Dre headphones now, but we are obviously going towards the direction of earbuds very soon. So that's, for me, a very important takeaway. This is not something that we should worry about in 10 years. This is something you might want to look at right now, here, and at this moment. And I conclude by highlighting what Milena highlighted. There is a nexus here between human rights and neurotechnology. And there are ethical issues that need to be borne in mind so that we don't sleepwalk into a brave new world here without concluding that there is great potential, but there is also a downside. There is a role here for government, civil society, the private sector, and also international organizations. And I conclude just by what does this mean now for us, for Stefano and me and our crew here. I take it from Milena. What we need is potentially a neurotech manifesto. So we are going to work on it. And Milena, we come back to you. I mean, this organization, ITC, has to think about a manifesto similar to our AI manifesto. Looking at Murielle and Adam, I think we have reached a stage where we can talk about sandbox experiments with wearables in a cautious approach within the role planks of these manifestos, but sandbox experiments with wearables which are fit for purpose, for our purpose. And then finally, communication advocacy also vis-a-vis the ILO, the mothership, and talking about the nexus between neurotechnology and social justice beyond the future of learning and beyond the realm of scope of work of ITC, the broader picture about the future of work and how it will shape up with neurotech. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you have enjoyed this seminar as much as we have. And see you soon for our next edition on quantum technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
you.
Thank
Ciao.
you. Thank you very much.
Bye.